The flames were just starting to catch on the kindling when I heard the shriek from across the cul-de-sac that would change everything about living in Meadowbrook Estates, Phoenix, Arizona. I had been planning this bonfire for 3 weeks. Not some reckless inferno in my backyard, mind you, but a proper, contained fire pit gathering to celebrate my younger brother's college graduation. The fire pit itself was a professionally installed unit I had commissioned 2 months earlier, complete with a surrounding patio made of non-combustible materials, a spark screen, and situated a safe distance from any structures or vegetation. As fire marshal for Phoenix's District 7, I knew exactly what I was doing. My name is Eckhart, and I have served in fire prevention and safety for 12 years. The last thing I would ever do is create an actual fire hazard on my own property. But try explaining that to Carol Pemberton, the self-appointed guardian of Meadowbrook Estates and the president of our HOA board. "Excuse me," Carol's voice carried across the evening air like a siren. "Excuse me, that is completely against regulations." I looked up from where I was arranging the logs to see her marching across the street, her phone already pressed to her ear. She wore what I had come to think of as her official business outfit, a cream-colored blazer over a floral blouse, khaki capris, and sensible flats. Her highlighted blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her face was already flushed red with indignation. "Carol, everything is completely within code," I called out calmly. "This pit was inspected and approved." She ignored me completely, speaking rapidly into her phone. "Yes, hello. I need to report a dangerous fire in a residential neighborhood. 2847 Seguero Drive in Meadowbrook Estates. Yes, it is an emergency. Someone is building a massive bonfire that could spread and burn down the entire neighborhood." I sighed and stood up, dusting off my hands. My brother Danny and his girlfriend Rebecca were setting up chairs on the patio, and they both stopped to watch the scene unfolding. Danny raised his eyebrows at me questioningly. "Is this the neighbor you told me about?" he asked. "That would be her," I replied. Carol finished her call and marched right up to the edge of my property line, careful not to actually step onto my land. She had learned that lesson 6 months ago, when I had politely but firmly informed her that repeated trespassing could result in legal consequences. "The police and fire department are on their way," she announced triumphantly. "That fire pit is not only against HOA regulations, but it is also a danger to the entire community. I have warned you time and again about following the rules, Aaron. This neighborhood has standards." "Carol, I am literally a fire marshal. I know fire safety regulations better than anyone. This pit is completely legal and safe." "I do not care what your job is," she snapped. "The HOA covenant clearly states that no open flames are permitted on residential properties, except for gas grills in designated areas. You did not get permission from the board to install that monstrosity, and you certainly did not get permission to light fires in it." This was technically true about not getting HOA permission, but I had done my research. The covenant she was referring to was from 1987, before the neighborhood was even officially incorporated. When Meadowbrook Estates was redeveloped in 2003, new covenants were filed that superseded the old ones. The new covenants, which were the legally binding ones, only restricted unsafe or uncontrolled fires. My professionally installed and inspected fire pit fell well within legal parameters, but Carol Pemberton did not like being told she was wrong about anything. "I am not having this argument again," I said evenly. "The fire department will be here soon, and they will confirm that everything is in order. In the meantime, I am going to continue preparing for my brother's graduation party." "We will see about that," Carol hissed. I have already documented multiple violations at this property. Your grass was a quarter-inch too tall last month. You left your trash cans visible from the street past noon on collection day. And now this fire hazard. The board is preparing a formal notice that could result in daily fines of up to $500. Before I could respond, my neighbor from next door, Walter Chen, came walking over with a bottle of wine in hand. Hey, Aaron, congratulations to Danny, Walter said cheerfully, then noticed Carol. Oh, hello, Carol, are you here for the party? There is not going to be any party, Carol said icily. This illegal gathering is being shut down. Walter looked confused. Illegal gathering. It is just a few people in his backyard. With an unpermitted fire that violates multiple safety codes and HOA regulations, Carol insisted. Walter, who was an attorney specializing in property law, actually laughed. Carol, you cannot seriously think that HOA covenants override city permits. If Aaron has the proper permits, and I am sure he does, then the HOA has no authority here. Carol's face turned an even deeper shade of red. The HOA has the authority to maintain property values and ensure the safety of all residents. If you are going to take his side, Walter, then perhaps the board needs to take a closer look at your property as well. I noticed some paint peeling on your garage door. Are you threatening me? Walter asked, his tone shifting from amused to serious. The sound of sirens cut through the evening air before Carol could respond. 2 police cruisers and a fire department engine came rolling down Saguaro Drive, lights flashing. Several neighbors had started coming out of their houses to see what was happening. This was exactly the kind of spectacle I had wanted to avoid. Nothing says celebrating your brother's achievement like having emergency services show up to your house. The fire engine pulled up first, and I felt my stomach drop slightly when I recognized it as Engine 23 from Station 7. My station. 3 firefighters jumped out, led by Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez, who I had worked with for the past 8 years. Marcus took one look at the scene, then at me, then at the small, controlled fire burning peacefully in my permitted fire pit. His expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the amusement in his eyes. Evening, Marshal Eckhart, he said formally. We received a report of a dangerous fire at this address. Good evening, Lieutenant Rodriguez, I replied, matching his formal tone. As you can see, this is a permitted and inspected fire pit being operated well within safety parameters. Carol stepped forward immediately. Officers, this man is creating a fire hazard in a residential neighborhood. The flames are completely uncontrolled and could spread at any moment. Marcus glanced at the fire pit, which contained a modest fire roughly 2 feet high, completely enclosed by the metal fire ring and covered by a spark screen. He pulled out a tablet and checked something. Madam, according to our records, this fire pit was installed 8 weeks ago under permit number FP 2847 SD24, issued by this department. It passed inspection on March 15th. The installation meets all current fire codes for the city of Phoenix. One of the police officers, a young guy I did not recognize, stepped forward. So there is no violation here. No violation, Marcus confirmed. This is a legally permitted recreational fire. The property owner is actually the fire marshal for this district, so I can assure you he knows what he is doing. The moment of realization that crossed Carol's face was absolutely priceless. Her mouth opened and closed several times, her eyes going wide as she processed what Marcus had just said. Fire marshal, she repeated weakly. That is correct, madam, Marcus said, and now he was not bothering to hide his smile. Marshal Eckhart has been with the department for 12 years. He is actually my direct supervisor. Carol looked like she had swallowed something extremely sour. The color had drained from her face, leaving 2 spots of red high on her cheeks. The second police officer, an older woman with sergeant stripes, shook her head. "Madam, you are aware that filing a false emergency report is a misdemeanor offense, right?" "False." "I did not file a false report," Carol sputtered. "There is a fire. You can see it right there." "A completely legal fire," the sergeant corrected. "You reported it as an emergency and a danger to the neighborhood." "Given that it is neither of those things, and given that the property owner is literally a fire marshal, I would say you wasted city resources." "I was acting in the interest of neighborhood safety," Carol insisted, but her voice had lost its sharp edge. She looked around at the growing crowd of neighbors, many of whom were now openly watching the confrontation with interest. Marcus walked over to the fire pit and did a quick inspection, checking the clearances and the installation. He nodded approvingly. "Everything looks good here, Marshal," he said. "Nice installation work. Who did you use?" "Southwest Fire and Patio," I replied. "They did excellent work." "I will have to remember that." Marcus turned to Carol. "Madam, this fire is completely safe and legal. If you have concerns about HOA regulations, that is a civil matter between the property owners and the association. It is not a fire department or police matter unless there is an actual code violation, which there is not." Carol opened her mouth to argue, but the sergeant cut her off. "Madam, I am going to need your name and contact information for our report. My name is Carol Pemberton, and I am the president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA," Carol said stiffly. "I was simply doing my duty to protect this community." The sergeant wrote this down. "Well, Mrs. Pemberton, in the future, you might want to verify whether something is actually a violation before calling 911. We have real emergencies to respond to." The fire crew packed up their equipment and headed back to the engine. Marcus gave me a casual salute as he climbed into the cab. "Enjoy your party, Marshal," he called out. "Try not to let the HOA president burn the place down out of spite." The neighbors who had gathered laughed at this, and Carol's face went red again. The police cruisers pulled away, and slowly the crowd began to disperse, though I noticed several people lingering to talk in small groups. No doubt the story of Carol calling the cops on the fire marshal would be all over the neighborhood by tomorrow morning. Carol stood at the edge of my property for a long moment, clearly struggling with what to say. Finally, she straightened her blazer and lifted her chin. "This is not over," she said coldly. "Fire pit or not, you still violated HOA procedures by not seeking board approval for the installation. That is still a violation of the covenants, and you will be fined accordingly." "Carol, as my neighbor Walter just explained, the HOA cannot override city permits," I said patiently. "You can try to fine me, but it would not hold up if challenged." "We will see what the HOA attorney has to say about that," Carol retorted. She turned on her heel and marched back across the street to her house, pulling out her phone again before she even reached her front door. Danny walked up beside me and let out a low whistle. "Dude, your HOA president is intense. You have no idea," I muttered. "This has been going on for almost a year now." Rebecca joined us, holding 2 beers. She handed one to Danny and one to me. "So what is her problem exactly?" "Control," Walter said, still standing nearby. "Carol needs to control everything in this neighborhood. She has been HOA president for 6 years, and it has gotten progressively worse. She fines people for the most minor infractions, sends nasty letters, and generally makes life miserable for anyone who does not follow her rules to the letter." "Why does not anyone vote her out?" Danny asked. "People have tried," Walter explained. "But she has a couple of allies on the board who vote with her on everything, and most residents do not bother coming to the meetings. The last election only had about 30% turnout, and Carol won by 20 votes. "That is insane," Rebecca said. I took a sip of my beer and looked at the fire, which was burning nicely now. The really frustrating part is that she does not even follow the rules herself. Her property has just as many minor violations as anyone else's, but she never gets fined. "That is called selective enforcement," Walter said. "And it is actually one of the things you can sue an HOA over. If they are applying rules inconsistently, they are violating their own bylaws." An idea was starting to form in my mind, but before I could pursue it further, more guests started arriving. My parents showed up, then some of Danny's college friends, then a few of my coworkers from the fire department. Soon, we had about 20 people gathered around the fire, talking and laughing and celebrating Danny's achievement. I tried to put the incident with Carol out of my mind and just enjoy the evening. Danny had worked incredibly hard to get his engineering degree, often holding down 2 part-time jobs while taking a full course load. He deserved this celebration, and I was not going to let Carol Pemberton ruin it, but I kept noticing her house across the street. The lights were on in what I knew was her home office, and I could occasionally see her silhouette passing in front of the window. She was up to something, and I had a feeling I would be hearing about it soon. The party wound down around 11. City noise ordinances prohibited excessive noise after 10 on weeknights, and I was careful to follow those rules. The last guests left around 11:30, and Danny and Rebecca helped me clean up and make sure the fire was completely extinguished. "Thanks for doing this, bro," Danny said as he helped me carry chairs back to the garage. "Despite the crazy neighbor, it was a great night." "You earned it," I replied. "I am really proud of you, Dan." We finished cleaning up and they headed inside to the guest room. I did a final check of the fire pit, making sure every coal was cold, then headed in myself. I should have known that would not be the end of it. 3 days later, I came home from work to find a certified letter taped to my front door. The return address was from Stevens and Associates, the law firm that represented the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. Inside was a formal notice of violation and fine assessment. According to the letter, I was in violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA covenants for installation of exterior structures without prior board approval. The fine was $5,000, due within 30 days, $5,000. I read through the letter 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. The covenant section they cited did require approval for major exterior modifications, but it specifically defined those as things like room additions, swimming pools, or detached structures. A fire pit installed flush with an existing patio did not remotely qualify. I called Walter immediately. "They are really reaching with this one," Walter said after I read him the letter. "That covenant section is clearly meant for major construction projects. No reasonable interpretation would include a fire pit." "So what do?" I asked. "You have 2 options. You can pay the fine and then sue to recover it, arguing that it was improperly assessed. Or you can refuse to pay and force them to sue you, defending yourself on the grounds that no violation occurred. Which would you recommend?" Walter was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I would fight it, but you need to know that Carol will not back down easily. She will drag this out as long as possible, and it could get expensive. HOAs have deep pockets because they can assess all the homeowners to cover legal costs. So I would be paying to sue myself, essentially. In a way, yes. Your HOA dues would go toward the legal fees for both sides." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. This is ridiculous. "Welcome to HOA disputes," Walter said sympathetically. "Look, there is a board meeting next Tuesday. You have the right to appear and contest the fine before it becomes final. I would strongly suggest you do that. Will it actually help? Probably not, given that Carol controls the board. But it puts your objections on the record, which helps if this does go to court. The following Tuesday, I found myself sitting in the community center meeting room with about a dozen other residents. The room was depressingly beige, with folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table where the 5 board members sat. Carol presided from the center seat, flanked by her 2 main allies. Margaret Sutton, an elderly woman who seemed to agree with everything Carol said, and Robert Hayes, a middle-aged accountant who rarely spoke but always voted with Carol. The other 2 board members, Lisa Park and James Morton, sometimes pushed back on Carol's more extreme positions, but they were consistently outvoted. The meeting started with standard business, approving the minutes from the last meeting, discussing landscaping contracts, and reviewing the current budget. I waited impatiently through 45 minutes of mundane details before they reached new business. Item 7, Carol announced, her voice taking on a particularly satisfied tone. Assessment of fine for violation at 2847 Saguaro Drive. I stood up. I am here to contest that fine. Carol barely glanced at me. Your objection has been noted. The board will now vote on whether to uphold the assessment. All those in favor. Wait a second, I said loudly. Do I not get to explain why I believe the fine is unjustified? James Morton spoke up. The resident does have a right to address the board before a vote is taken, Carol. That is in our bylaws. Carol's jaw tightened, but she nodded curtly. Fine. You have 3 minutes. I walked to the front of the room and turned to face the board. I had prepared for this, bringing copies of the relevant documents. The fine I received cites Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the HOA covenants, which requires approval for major exterior modifications. I began, distributing copies of the covenant language. However, if you read the actual text, it specifically defines major modifications as room additions, swimming pools, detached structures, and similar construction projects. A fire pit installed within an existing patio does not meet this definition. You installed a permanent structure, Carol interrupted. That requires approval. The covenant does not say that all permanent structures require approval, I countered. It only requires approval for the specific types of structures listed. Furthermore, the fire pit installation was fully permitted and inspected by the city. The city has authority over fire safety matters, not the HOA. The HOA has authority over aesthetic and property value concerns, Margaret Sutton said in her warbling voice. That unsightly fire pit reduces property values. You have any evidence that it reduces property values? I asked. Because I can provide documentation that professionally installed outdoor living features typically increase property values. Lisa Park leaned forward. I have actually seen the fire pit. I walked by last weekend. It is quite attractive and looks professionally done. I do not think it is an eyesore at all. That is not the point, Carol snapped. The point is that Mr. Eckhart deliberately circumvented the approval process. I did not circumvent anything, I said firmly. The approval process you are referring to does not apply to this installation. I followed all applicable city codes and obtained all required permits. The HOA covenant does not require approval for this type of project. Robert Hayes finally spoke up. Mrs. Pemberton, did we have the HOA attorney review this fine before it was assessed? Carol hesitated for just a fraction of a second. The violation was clear-cut. Attorney review was not necessary. I think we should have the attorney review it, James Morton said. This could get expensive if it is challenged in court, and we are in the wrong." "We are not in the wrong," Carol insisted. "Mr. Eckhart flagrantly violated our covenants, and he needs to be held accountable." "With all due respect, Carol, I think personal feelings might be clouding judgment here," Lisa Park said carefully. "Everyone knows there has been tension between you and Mr. Eckhart." "My personal feelings have nothing to do with this," Carol said icily. "I am simply enforcing the rules that apply to everyone equally." "Then perhaps we should review how equally those rules have been applied," I said. I pulled out my phone and brought up a series of photos I had taken over the past few days. "Mrs. Pemberton, your property currently has multiple violations according to the same strict interpretation of the rules you are applying to me. Your front yard has decorative statuary over 18 inches tall without board approval, in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 6. Your mailbox has been repainted a different color than the approved palette, violating Section 9, Paragraph 2. And you have installed solar path lighting without approval, arguably violating the same section you are using to fine me." The room went completely silent. Carol's face had gone pale, then red, then pale again. "Those are minor aesthetic choices," she finally managed. "Completely different from a permanent fire hazard." "It is not a fire hazard, and you know it," I said quietly. "The fire marshal's office has already confirmed that." "You are trying to fine me because I would not let you bully me, and because you were embarrassed when the fire department showed up and confirmed that you were wrong." "How dare you?" Carol hissed. "I have given 6 years of volunteer service to this community, and you have the audacity to accuse me of petty revenge." "If the facts support that conclusion, then yes," I replied. James Morton cleared his throat. "I move that we table this fine until the HOA attorney can review the matter and provide an opinion on whether the violation is valid." "I second," Lisa Park said immediately. Carol looked like she wanted to argue, but Robert Hayes nodded. "That seems reasonable. All those in favor?" James asked. 3 hands went up: James, Lisa, and Robert. Margaret Sutton kept her hand down, looking to Carol for guidance. "The motion carries," James announced. "The fine is tabled pending legal review." Carol gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements. "Fine. But I am confident that the attorney will confirm what I have been saying all along." She looked directly at me. "You have not won anything, Mr. Eckhart. You have just delayed the inevitable." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, but I barely paid attention. I had bought myself some time, but I knew this was far from over. Carol Pemberton was not the type to let something go, especially not after being challenged publicly. I was right. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 3 more violation notices. My grass was allegedly too long, even though I had measured it myself, and it was well within the allowed height. My trash cans were supposedly visible from the street, even though they were in the same location they had always been, tucked beside my garage. And I received a citation for excessive noise, because I had run my lawn mower at 9:30 on a Saturday morning, which was supposedly before the allowed time, even though the covenant clearly stated that lawn maintenance was permitted after 9. Each violation came with a threatened fine of $500. Walter advised me to document everything meticulously. I took time-stamped photos of my grass height, my trash can placement, and anything else that might be relevant. I started keeping a log of every interaction with Carol and every violation notice I received, but the harassment was starting to wear on me. I found myself dreading coming home, wondering what new notice would be waiting. I was spending my evenings fighting with bureaucracy instead of relaxing after long days at work. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later, from an unexpected source. I was outside washing my car on a Sunday afternoon when my neighbor from 2 doors down, an older woman named Patricia Holmes, walked over with her small dog. "Aaron, do you have a minute?" she asked quietly. "Of course, Mrs. Holmes. What can I do for you?" She glanced around nervously as if checking to see if anyone was watching. "I need to talk to you about Carol Pemberton and the HOA, but not out here. Can I come inside?" Intrigued, I invited her in and made coffee. Patricia sat at my kitchen table, her hands wrapped around the mug, looking troubled. "I have lived in this neighborhood for 18 years, she began. "I remember when Carol first joined the HOA board. She seemed so organized and enthusiastic. But over the past few years, especially since she became president, she has become increasingly controlling and vindictive." "I have noticed," I said dryly. Patricia smiled slightly. "Yes, well, you are not her only target. She has been systematically harassing several residents who have crossed her. The Johnsons 3 streets over had to pay $8,000 in fines over a fence dispute. The Martinses sold their house and moved away after Carol made their lives miserable over their landscaping choices. And there have been others. Why does not anyone stop her?" "Because she is clever," Patricia explained. "She never goes after too many people at once. She spaces it out, picks her targets carefully, and she has convinced Margaret and Robert to always vote with her so she controls the board." "But why are you telling me this?" Patricia took a deep breath. "Because I am on the Architectural Review Committee, and I have access to all the approval requests and violation records. I started looking through them after the meeting where you challenged her. Aaron, she has been selectively enforcing rules for years. There are dozens of properties with violations identical to the ones she is citing you for, but only certain people get fined. Can you prove that?" I made copies. She pulled a flash drive from her pocket. "Everything is on here. Violation notices, approval requests, photos from compliance inspections. There is a clear pattern of selective enforcement and personal bias." I stared at the flash drive. "Mrs. Holmes, this could be really important, but why are you giving this to me? Carol could make trouble for you." "I know," she said quietly, "but what she is doing is wrong. This HOA is supposed to serve the community, not be Carol's personal fiefdom. Someone needs to stand up to her, and you are the first person who has had the resources and the courage to fight back." I called Walter immediately after Patricia left. He came over that evening, and we spent 3 hours going through the files on the flash drive. The evidence was damning. Over the past 4 years, Carol had issued 63 violation notices to 27 different properties. But there were at least 40 other properties with identical or worse violations that had never received notices. The pattern was clear. People who agreed with Carol or stayed out of her way were left alone. People who challenged her or voiced disagreement received constant scrutiny and harassment. Even more interesting were the approval requests. Several people had applied for approval to install features similar to my fire pit, including outdoor kitchens, pergolas, and water features. Those requests had all been approved with minimal review, some within just a few days. But when I checked the dates, none of those approvals had occurred during Carol's tenure as president. "This is textbook selective enforcement," Walter said, scrolling through the documents. "And look at this. 3 different properties have the exact same mailbox color violation that Carol cited you for, but none of them received violation notices. Because those owners do not challenge her," I observed. "Exactly. This shows a pattern of using her position to punish people she has personal conflicts with. That is a violation of her fiduciary duty as HOA president. So what do we do with this?" Walter sat back and thought for a moment. We could go directly to court and sue for harassment and selective enforcement, but that would be expensive and time-consuming. I have a better idea. What is that? We take this to the HOA membership, not the board, the full membership. According to the Meadowbrook Estates bylaws, any 20 homeowners can petition for a special meeting to address concerns about board conduct. We gather signatures, call a meeting, present this evidence, and force a vote of no confidence in Carol's leadership. Would that actually work? If enough people show up, absolutely. The problem with HOA elections is not that people support Carol, it is that they do not care enough to vote. But if we can demonstrate that she has been abusing her power and harassing residents, I think we could get a good turnout. Over the next week, Walter and I quietly reached out to other residents. We started with people we knew had been targeted by Carol, then expanded to others who had simply grown tired of her management style. We were careful and discreet, meeting people in person rather than sending emails or making phone calls that could be traced. The response was overwhelming. Within 5 days, we had signatures from 38 homeowners requesting a special meeting. Several people shared their own stories of harassment and unfair treatment. The Johnsons, who had paid $8,000 in fines, were eager to participate. So were the current owners of the Martinez house, who had purchased it after the previous owners moved away. We filed the petition for a special meeting according to the proper procedures, delivering it to all 5 board members via certified mail. The meeting had to be held within 30 days of the petition being filed. Carol responded within 24 hours with an email to all homeowners, claiming that the special meeting was being called by a small group of malcontents who refused to follow community rules. She urged everyone to ignore the meeting and trust the board to handle governance appropriately. But her email had the opposite effect. Several people who had been on the fence about participating contacted Walter or me to say they would definitely be attending now. Carol's dismissive tone and refusal to take residents' concerns seriously had backfired. The special meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the community center. Walter and I arrived early to set up, bringing a laptop and projector to display the evidence we had gathered. We had prepared a presentation that laid out the pattern of selective enforcement clearly and professionally, without resorting to personal attacks. People started arriving 15 minutes before the scheduled start time. Then more came, and more. By the time the meeting was supposed to start, every chair in the room was filled and people were standing along the walls. I estimated at least 120 people had shown up, out of roughly 200 households in Meadowbrook Estates. Carol arrived exactly at 7, flanked by Margaret and Robert. She looked startled by the size of the crowd but quickly composed herself. She made her way to the front table and sat down with deliberate calm. "This meeting will come to order," she announced. "I understand that some residents have requested this special meeting to discuss concerns about board governance. While I believe this is a waste of everyone's time, we will proceed according to the proper procedures." She looked directly at me. "Mr. Eckhart, I believe you are the one who organized this gathering. You have the floor." I stood and walked to the front of the room, pulling up the first slide of the presentation on the projector screen. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I know everyone here has busy lives, and I appreciate you taking the time to be here tonight. I requested this meeting because I believe our HOA board, specifically our president, has been abusing her authority and selectively enforcing our community rules based on personal bias rather than consistent policy." I could see Carol's face reddening, but she remained silent. "Over the past several months, I have personally received multiple violation notices and fines from the HOA," I continued. Some of these were for legitimate concerns that I have addressed, but others have been for violations that are either factually incorrect or are not enforced against other residents with identical situations. I clicked to the next slide, which showed two photos side by side. One was of my mailbox, which Carol had cited for being the wrong color. The other was of a mailbox 4 streets over that was the exact same color. This is my mailbox, which I received a violation notice for, I explained. And this is the Henderson's mailbox at 3156 Desert Vista Drive, which is identical to mine but has never received a violation notice. Murmurs went through the crowd. I clicked to the next slide. This becomes more concerning when you look at the pattern over time. The slide showed a chart with color-coded bars representing violation notices by month and by recipient. This data covers the past 4 years. You can see that 27 properties have received the majority of violation notices, while dozens of other properties with similar or identical conditions have received none. I walked through several more examples, each time showing side-by-side comparisons of properties that were treated differently. A yard with grass slightly too tall that received a fine, next to another yard with grass equally tall that received no notice. A house with holiday decorations left up too long that was cited, next to another house with decorations up even longer that was not. The pattern was undeniable. And in each case, the property that received the violation notice belonged to someone who had disagreed with Carol at some point, while the property that was ignored belonged to someone who had not. Now, you might think this is just coincidence or oversight, I said, clicking to another slide. But when you look at the timeline of when these violations were issued, a different story emerges. This slide showed a timeline with specific violation notices and HOA meeting minutes. It demonstrated that in multiple cases, violation notices were issued within days of residents speaking up at board meetings or challenging Carol's decisions. The Johnsons received their first violation notice 3 days after Mr. Johnson questioned the board's decision to approve a landscaping contract at a meeting, I explained. Mrs. Chen received a notice about her mailbox 2 days after she emailed the board to suggest reviewing the covenant enforcement procedures. And I received my first violation notice the day after I installed my fire pit, which was fully permitted and inspected by the city. I paused and looked around the room. People were paying close attention now, many of them nodding or whispering to their neighbors. This is not about whether our community should have rules, I continued. Rules are important and necessary. This is about whether those rules are applied fairly and consistently, or whether they are used as weapons to punish people that our HOA president personally dislikes. This is outrageous, Carol interrupted, standing up. You are making wild accusations based on cherry-picked examples. There are legitimate reasons why different properties receive different levels of scrutiny. Then please explain those reasons, I replied calmly. Because I have documentation here showing 63 violation notices over 4 years, and I cannot find any consistent enforcement criteria other than whether the homeowner has crossed you. How dare you, Carol said, her voice rising. I have dedicated years of my life to this community. I volunteer my time to maintain our property values and ensure our neighborhood remains desirable. And this is the thanks I get. Baseless accusations and conspiracy theories. James Morton stood up from where he had been sitting in the front row. Carol, these are not baseless accusations. I have been concerned about enforcement patterns for over a year now. Every time I raise questions at board meetings, you shut down the discussion. Because there is nothing to discuss, Carol snapped. We enforce the rules as they are written. Except you do not, Lisa Park said, also standing. You enforce them against some people and not others. Aaron is right about that. Robert Hayes looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Margaret Sutton sat beside Carol, looking confused and worried. Walter stood up and addressed the crowd. For those who do not know me, I am Walter Chen. I am an attorney specializing in property law, and I have reviewed all the evidence that Aaron presented tonight. I can tell you that this pattern of selective enforcement is a serious violation of the HOA's fiduciary responsibilities. If this were challenged in court, the HOA would almost certainly lose, and it could cost all of us tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees and damages. No one is taking anyone to court, Carol said firmly. Mr. Eckhart is simply trying to avoid accountability for his own violations by creating a distraction. Then you would not object to an independent audit of HOA enforcement practices? Walter asked. Carol hesitated, just for a moment. That is unnecessary and expensive. Actually, I volunteer to conduct it for free, Walter said. As a homeowner and attorney, I have both the expertise and the interest in ensuring our HOA is well managed. Unless you have something to hide, there should be no objection to transparency. The crowd murmured in agreement. Several people called out yes or good idea. Carol looked around the room, seeming to realize she was losing control of the situation. Fine, an audit can be conducted, but this meeting has gone on long enough. I move that we adjourn. You cannot adjourn a special meeting called by the membership, Walter said. The petition that triggered this meeting included a request to vote on the current board's leadership. That vote must take place tonight. That is not proper procedure, Carol objected. Actually, it is, James Morton said. It is right here in the bylaws, Section 14. Any special meeting called by membership petition can include binding votes on board composition. Carol sat down slowly, her face now completely drained of color. She seemed to realize, finally, that this was not going to go her way. I returned to the podium. I would like to propose a vote of no confidence in Carol Pemberton's leadership as HOA president. Additionally, I propose that we vote on whether to retain or remove the current board members, and if removed, hold immediate elections for new board positions. I second that proposal, someone called from the back of the room. All those in favor of holding these votes? I asked. A forest of hands went up. I did a quick count and estimated at least 90% of the attendees had voted yes. The motion carries. We will now vote on the no confidence measure for Carol Pemberton. The vote was not even close. Out of the 120 people present, 106 voted in favor of the no confidence measure. Only 8 voted against and 6 abstained. Carol sat frozen in her chair, staring straight ahead. Margaret Sutton was crying quietly. Robert Hayes was staring at his hands. We proceeded to vote on the rest of the board. James Morton and Lisa Park both received votes of confidence and retained their seats. Robert Hayes and Margaret Sutton were removed, along with Carol. We held elections for the 3 vacant seats immediately. The process was informal but democratic. People nominated candidates. The candidates had 2 minutes to speak, and we voted by show of hands. By 9:30 that evening, we had a completely new board majority. Walter was elected as the new HOA president. Patricia Holmes, despite her initial reluctance, was elected as vice president. And a retired engineer named Gary Foster was elected as the new treasurer. The meeting finally adjourned at 10. People came up to thank me and Walter as they filed out. Several shared their own stories of problems with Carol's management and expressed relief that change was finally happening. Carol left without speaking to anyone, Margaret trailing behind her. As she passed me on her way to the door, she finally made eye contact. "You have no idea what you have done," she said quietly. "This neighborhood is going to fall apart without proper leadership." "I guess we will find out," I replied. Over the next few weeks, the new board got to work. One of their first actions was to rescind all pending fines that had been issued under the old enforcement regime, including mine. They also voted to refund previous fines where evidence of selective enforcement could be demonstrated. The Johnsons got their $8,000 back. Walter conducted his promised audit of HOA practices and discovered even more problems. Carol had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including claiming reimbursement for community meetings that were actually lunches with Margaret and Robert. The amounts were not huge, maybe $3,000 total over 2 years, but it was clear misappropriation of community funds. The board referred the matter to the Maricopa County District Attorney's Office. An investigation was opened into possible embezzlement and fraud. I thought that would be the end of my interactions with Carol Pemberton. I was wrong. 6 weeks after the special meeting, I was at work in my office at the fire station when I got a call from Phoenix Police Department. "Marshal Eckhart, this is Detective Sarah Webb with Phoenix PD. I am investigating a case of arson at a property in Meadowbrook Estates, and your name has come up in connection with the investigation." My stomach dropped. "Arson? What property?" 3156 Desert Vista Drive, the Henderson residence. It burned last night. The fire was deliberately set. The Hendersons, the couple whose mailbox I had used in my presentation as an example of selective enforcement. "I do not understand why my name would be connected," I said carefully. "Because we found evidence at the scene that references you specifically," Detective Webb said. "Can you come down to the station? I would like to ask you some questions." I agreed and drove to the police station, my mind racing. This did not make any sense. Why would there be evidence at an arson scene with my name on it? Detective Webb was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s. She led me to an interview room and laid out several photos on the table. "The fire started in the garage and spread to the main structure," she explained. "The homeowners were out of town, fortunately, so no one was injured, but the house is a total loss." She pulled out one photo in particular. It showed a partially burned piece of paper with printing on it. I leaned closer and felt my blood run cold. It was a page from my presentation at the special meeting. The page with the side-by-side photos of mailboxes, including the Hendersons' mailbox. "This was found near the point of origin," Detective Webb said. "Can you explain why a document you created would be at an arson scene?" "I cannot," I said honestly. "That was part of a presentation I gave at an HOA meeting 6 weeks ago. Copies were distributed to everyone who attended, which was over 100 people. So anyone at that meeting could have this document." "Yes, and probably others too, since people could have shared it." Detective Webb studied me carefully. "Marshal Eckhart, I have to ask, where were you last night between 9 and midnight?" "At home, asleep. I worked a double shift yesterday and got home around 8. I was exhausted." "Can anyone corroborate that?" "My brother might be able to. He was staying with me this week." I pulled out my phone. "I can also show you my cell phone location data if that helps." "That would be helpful, yes." I spent the next hour providing information and answering questions. Detective Webb was professional but thorough. She clearly considered me a potential suspect, which was understandable given the evidence, but I also got the sense that she did not really think I was involved. "One more question," she said as we were wrapping up. "Do you know of anyone who might have reason to frame you for this?" I hesitated, then told her about Carol Pemberton. The whole story. The fire pit incident, the harassment, the special meeting, the embezzlement investigation. Detective Webb took notes and nodded. I am familiar with Mrs. Pemberton. She actually called us last night to report the fire. Said she saw smoke and called 911. That made me pause. She called it in. Yes, about 11:15. Do you know when the fire actually started? Detective Webb flipped through her notes. Based on the burn patterns and witness statements, the arson investigator estimated it started around 11. So Carol had called in a fire that she would have had to notice within 15 minutes of it starting, late at night, at a house 4 streets away from hers. That was quite a coincidence. Detective, I think you should take a very close look at Carol Pemberton, I said. She would have access to that document from the meeting. She has a clear grudge against me, and her calling in that fire so quickly is suspicious. We will be interviewing everyone involved in the HOA dispute, Detective Webb assured me. Thank you for your cooperation, Marshal Eckhart. We will be in touch. I called Walter from my car and told him what had happened. He was shocked and angry. That is insane, he said. Even for Carol, arson is a huge escalation. We do not know it was her, I cautioned, but the timing is very suspicious. I am calling an emergency board meeting, Walter said. The board needs to know about this. The emergency meeting happened that evening. The 5 board members gathered in Walter's living room, since we wanted to keep this quiet until we knew more. I explained what had happened and what the police had told me. Everyone was horrified, particularly when I mentioned that the document from my presentation had been found at the scene. That is clearly an attempt to frame you, Patricia Holmes said. Everyone knows you would never commit arson, especially given your profession. But it still casts suspicion on me, which was probably the point, I replied. Gary Foster, the new treasurer, spoke up. I found something interesting while going through the HOA financial records. Carol made a large ATM withdrawal from the HOA account 3 days ago, $5,000 in cash. She does not have access to those accounts anymore, Walter said. She should not, Gary agreed. But apparently she never returned the debit card. I only discovered it when I was reconciling the bank statement. I have already contacted the bank to freeze the account and issue new cards. What would she need $5,000 cash for? Lisa Park wondered. Nothing good, James Morton said grimly. My phone rang. It was Detective Webb. Marshal Eckhart, I wanted to give you a heads up. We brought Carol Pemberton in for questioning. She has lawyered up and is not saying anything, but we have some new evidence that is very concerning. What kind of evidence? Video from a neighbor's security camera shows a car matching Mrs. Pemberton's vehicle driving slowly past the Henderson house at 10:45 last night. We are working on getting a warrant to search her property and vehicle. That is good news for me, I guess. Yes, you are no longer considered a suspect, but I wanted to warn you, if Mrs. Pemberton did do this and if she was trying to frame you, she might try something else. Be careful. I shared this information with the board after hanging up. Everyone agreed that I should take precautions, and Walter offered to let me stay at his place for a few days if I felt unsafe going home. I appreciate that, but I am not going to be driven out of my own house, I said. I will be careful, but I am not hiding. The next 2 days were tense. I varied my routine, kept my doors locked, and stayed alert. The investigation into the Henderson fire continued, with police executing search warrants on Carol's house and car. On the 3rd day, Detective Webb called again. We have arrested Carol Pemberton, she said. We found evidence in her garage linking her to the fire, including a gas can with accelerant residue that matches what was used at the Henderson house. We also found handwritten notes that appear to be planning documents for the arson, including references to framing you. Oh my God, I breathed. There is more. When we confronted her with this evidence, she initially denied everything. But then she seemed to snap. She started ranting about how the neighborhood had betrayed her, how you had destroyed everything she built, how you all deserved to be punished. She basically confessed to everything while having what I can only describe as a breakdown. Is she going to be charged? Oh yes. Arson, attempted fraud, making false statements to police, and probably a few other charges once the DA reviews everything. Given the deliberate nature of the crime and the attempt to frame you, she is looking at serious prison time. I thanked Detective Webb and immediately called Walter to share the news. Within an hour, it was all over the neighborhood. People were shocked that their former HOA president had actually committed arson, but given everything else that had come out about her behavior, maybe it should not have been as surprising as it was. The Henderson family was devastated when they returned from their trip to find their home destroyed, but they were overwhelmed by the community response. Neighbors organized fundraising efforts, donated clothing and furniture, and helped them find temporary housing. It was the neighborhood coming together in a way that Carol had never managed to inspire, despite all her talk about community standards. The legal process moved forward slowly but surely. Carol was denied bail after the prosecution argued she was a danger to the community. Her attorney tried to argue diminished capacity due to mental health issues, but given the evidence of planning and premeditation, that argument did not get much traction. The embezzlement investigation also resulted in charges. Between the misappropriated HOA funds and the $5,000 withdrawal, prosecutors had a solid case. Carol's attorney eventually negotiated a plea deal. She would plead guilty to second-degree arson, embezzlement, and attempted fraud. In exchange for the guilty plea, several lesser charges were dropped, and the prosecution would recommend 15 years with possibility of parole after 10. The judge accepted the plea deal. At the sentencing hearing, I attended along with Walter and several other Meadowbrook Estates residents. Carol's appearance shocked me. She had aged what looked like 10 years in the 3 months since her arrest. Her hair was gray and unkempt, her face gaunt. When given a chance to speak before sentencing, she stood and addressed the court. "I know what I did was wrong," she said, her voice thin and shaky. "I do not expect forgiveness. I let my anger and my pride control me, and I hurt people who did not deserve it. The Henderson family lost their home because of me. That is something I will have to live with for the rest of my life." She glanced back at where I was sitting. "I am particularly sorry to Mr. Eckhart. He was just trying to enjoy his property and live his life. I made that into some kind of war, and I became a monster in the process." The judge was not swayed by the apology. "Mrs. Pemberton, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust in the worst possible ways. You harassed your neighbors, you stole from the HOA, and then you committed arson and tried to frame an innocent man. The only reason no one died is pure luck. Your actions demonstrated a profound disregard for others' safety and rights." He imposed the sentence as agreed in the plea deal, 15 years, with parole eligibility after 10. As Carol was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, I felt an odd mixture of emotions. Relief, certainly. Vindication, maybe. But also a strange sadness. This was a woman who had let her need for control consume her to the point where she destroyed her own life and tried to destroy others. Life in Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal after that. The new HOA board implemented several reforms to prevent future abuses. Enforcement procedures were standardized and documented. An oversight committee was established to review all violation notices before they were issued. and board meetings were now recorded and made available to all homeowners. Property values, far from declining as Carol had warned, actually increased. Turns out people preferred living in a neighborhood with fair, transparent governance rather than one run by a tyrant. The Hendersons' house was rebuilt using insurance money and donations from the community. They were able to move back in almost exactly a year after the fire. The neighborhood threw them a welcome home party with a big gathering in the community center. I made sure not to have any bonfires for that particular celebration. My fire pit, the thing that had started all of this, became something of a neighborhood landmark. On clear evenings, neighbors would often gather there informally, talking and watching the flames. It became a symbol of the community coming together, of standing up against abuse of power. I continued my work as fire marshal, and the story of the HOA president who tried to frame me for arson became something of a legend at the fire station. Rookie firefighters would hear the tale and shake their heads in disbelief. I used it as a teaching example about the importance of proper fire safety procedures and documentation. Danny finished his degree and got a great job with an engineering firm in Denver. Before he moved, he came to visit one more time. We sat around the fire pit, just the two of us, drinking beer and talking. "That fire pit caused you so much trouble," he observed. "Do you ever regret installing it?" I thought about that for a moment, watching the flames dance. "No," I finally said. "The fire pit did not cause the trouble. Carol's need to control everyone caused the trouble. If it had not been the fire pit, it would have been something else. At least this way, her abuse of power got exposed and stopped before she could hurt even more people." "True," Danny agreed. "And you got a pretty good story out of it." That I did. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn. In the distance, I could hear children playing in a neighbor's yard, and someone was grilling somewhere nearby. It was a perfect Arizona evening, warm but not too hot, with a slight breeze carrying the scent of mesquite. This was what a neighborhood should be, I thought. People living their lives, respecting each other, following reasonable rules but not being tyrannized by them. It had taken a lot of conflict to get here, but it was worth it. My phone buzzed with a text from Walter. The message made me smile. "Board meeting next week to discuss rules for Halloween decorations. I promise no one will go to jail this time." I texted back, "That is what you said about the Christmas lights last year." His response, "Fair point." I looked at the fire pit, at the carefully arranged stones and the professionally installed gas line that supplemented the wood burning. Carol had called it an eyesore and a hazard. But it was neither of those things. It was exactly what I had intended it to be. A safe, legal gathering place where people could come together. Sometimes standing up for yourself is not about being stubborn or refusing to compromise. It is about knowing when something is right and being willing to defend that, even when it is difficult. Even when powerful people try to tear you down. Even when it would be easier to just give in and go along. The fire pit had been my hill to die on, though I certainly had not expected it to escalate the way it did. But I did not regret fighting back. Carol had been abusing her power for years, and someone needed to stand up to her. If it had not been me over the fire pit, it would have been someone else over something else, and who knows how much longer her reign of terror would have continued. The community was better now, stronger, more united. And while it had taken a dramatic series of events to get here, including arson and arrests and court trials, we had emerged on the other side as a real neighborhood rather than just a collection of houses ruled by a petty tyrant. I added another log to the fire and watched the sparks rise up into the darkening sky. Tomorrow, I would go back to work, inspecting buildings and enforcing fire codes and keeping people safe. But tonight, I was just a guy sitting by his fire pit, enjoying a beer with his brother in a neighborhood that had finally learned what community really meant. The flames crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows across the patio. In the distance, I heard the sound of Carol's old house's new owners laughing on their porch. They were a young family with 2 kids, and they had already become beloved members of the community. They actually came to HOA meetings and volunteered for committees. They were what Carol had claimed to want for the neighborhood, but had never actually fostered. Life had a funny way of working out sometimes. The woman who had tried to control every aspect of the neighborhood was now in prison, while the community she tried to rule had blossomed into something healthier and happier than it had ever been under her leadership. I raised my beer bottle in a silent toast to that irony, and to the fire pit that had, in its own way, helped set us all free.